Najpierw takie bardzo robocze pytanie, bo chciałem dowiedzieć się, jak to wyglądało.
The first thing to say is it really took a long time. Like it was solid work for 2 years, and in a sense I'd started to write that book probably when I was a teenager, like mentally trying to work out what was interesting to me, and that I used so many different techniques, and there was so much reporting, and what you see in the book, probably 5% of the interviews that took place, probably less than 2% of the days and nights I spent reporting are present in the book. When I was a teenager, I started writing little short stories for my friends, and I started collecting stories. Like, I knew that my friends would find it really funny if I told them these stories from these bits of London that were not in the newspapers. And I knew from when I was a teenager that there was a really interesting sort of Arab London that wasn't really in our mental geography. I knew that lots of different communities weren't really part of how the media talked about the city. So just in terms of like the themes, I didn't realize it at the time, but now I can see I was sort of moving towards something. My father's a journalist, and I lived in Eastern Europe as a child. I was born in London, and I would come back in the summer to see my grandparents, but I had this feeling, not quite of immigration, but certainly of arrival in London when I was a child. I remember just being blown away by supermarkets. I hadn't really seen them of that scale before. I remember being blown away by the diversity of the city. And so that stayed with me. I come from a Jewish family, and I grew up in a world where most people were Jewish, and I went to a French school where most people were speaking French, and most people had French background and French parents. And so I knew from a very, very young age that I was living between two very specific bubbles. And I knew that when I met children that went to English schools, that we were in a bubble and we were not like them. So I only really felt like I met real English people when I went to university. So I had from childhood this knowledge that there's not one London, there are hundreds of Londons. The book is written by these many different schizophrenic parts of me. There's the part of me that is a journalist that worked at a wire agency, notebook, you're the ghost at the scene, asking questions. There's the part of me that as a teenager used to paint and wanted to be a painter. Like, people would sit down, talk for hours. I was like channeling Sigmund Freud, trying to get people to tell me their darkest secrets and fears. There's the part of me that works professionally as a think tank analyst, fascinated by data and hidden chunks of the population that can only be picked up by analysing spreadsheets, trying to work out, wow, there are hundreds of thousands of cleaners in London. Their experience is fundamental to mapping the city. And then there's the part of me which has always thought that ethnography was the queen of the humanities, and like been really inspired by studying and listening to kind of oral storytelling techniques, and believing it's very important to let people speak unguided and uncensored. I was very tired when I finished the book, like very, very tired, very worn out, and I tried really hard to like transmit and capture people's emotions and energies, and like try and find ways of writing up their stories that enhance that, so you could feel it as a reader. And sometimes that would leave me feeling totally buzzed and empowered and often like really joyful, and sometimes that would just exhaust me. I'd feel totally flat for days afterwards. I feel I put everything that I knew and everything that I'd found into the book, and I'd expected to be able to leap into another one quite quickly afterwards, and I found that I'd actually exhausted something there for a lot longer than I expected. Coming back to the question of lingering after effects, I was quite haunted by the knowledge that everybody's still doing the same thing. All the people profiled in the book are still doing what they were doing. And when the book came out, I sort of looked for a lot of the people, invited some of them to appear on TV with me, to talk about it, to participate in a short documentaries that we made, and loads of them did, and I gave them copies of the book, and they told me how things had changed and usually not changed. And some people never found them again, and I was quite haunted by that. So with the gentleman who's on the front cover, I saw him once afterwards at a tube station in Notting Hill Gate. He'd lost his hat, he looked very much worse for wear. You know, I took his number and I told him the development of the project and that I wanted to see him again, and called the number 10 times, asked other people on the street, number was dead, never found him again. And that happened with a few other people in the book, and that was quite haunting. One thing I really don't like in journalism is older male journalists, usually bald, their best work 30 years behind them, saying that younger journalists suck. And I see so many other journalists my age writing amazing stuff, and I think that there's a great generation of young British journalists writing about Brexit, the politics and the culture of the rest of the country, about Scotland, about London. So I feel things are actually getting better all the time. The one thing that I would say is a problem in Anglo-Saxon media is just the political crisis in London and Washington is just taking up so much bandwidth that even though there are loads of young, great journalists, it's difficult for them to get their stories on the agenda when Britain's in such a difficult position with Brexit. But I've always been very, very inspired by writers who are from Europe, and I think that there's a big tendency in the British media just to look at the US. And you know, one country that I think that British journalists and British publishers should look at is Poland. And I think Poland has, without a doubt, the greatest school of reportage. And I was super inspired from when I was at school by the works of Ryszard Kapuscinski, by Jacek Hugo Bada writing about Russia, by Hannah Krall writing about the Jewish experience in Poland. And when I go to a bookshop and I see in Poland the reportage section, there's so many cracking ideas there that it makes me think that I should learn Polish in order to be a better journalist. I really think that we need to translate more books between European countries, and I think that the way Norway sponsors literature and sponsors translation is really something that the European Commission and Parliament should look into. You know, there's just such an incredible literary tradition to have come out of Poland, and anybody kind of who reads mainly in the English language, even if they don't know it, is deeply marked by Conrad. And I've always loved Conrad's path of even if they were novels, they were in their own way like deeply reported and really trying to tackle the questions of his time. You know, I was thinking just today, just because I was in Krakow, about, you know, how prophetic Heart of Darkness is, you know, and how the personality of Mr. Kurtz at a time of such European self-love, like, looks into the future to these great terrors of the 20th century and these self-styled Europeans becoming creatures like the guardians of the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, or the field officers of French Algeria. You know, I think that that's what really being dedicated to writing fictional journalism about what you see can do. You know, I think that, you know, there's so much that we have to learn from how Polish writers write, report and think.